Okay, welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we're plunging into something truly immersive. We have this incredible source material. It's a personal narrative, right? A first-hand account from someone who's spent a whole month trying to live like a local in El Salvador.
Yeah, it's a really raw look. Captures the challenges, the, unexpected joys, the cultural insights, and the real transformation that came with it.
Exactly. And this isn't your standard tourist guide, is it? It's more like an experiment in deep immersion.
That's right. So our mission here for this deep dive is really to unpack that journey for you, the listener. We want to pull out the key takeaways.
The vital nuggets.
Exactly. The hurdles they faced, the connections they managed to build, what they ate, saw, and ultimately those big, lasting lessons learned. It's kind of a shortcut for you to grasp what it really means to step way outside your comfort zone.
To try and become part of a different world, yeah. All through this one person's fascinating story. Okay, so let's dive in. First question that pops up. Why El Salvador? Out of all the places, what was the draw described in the source?
Well, the source paints El Salvador as this Central American gem, often overlooked, maybe. It's the smallest country on the mainland, but apparently just packed with diverse landscapes. You've got the Pacific coastline, obviously famous for surfing. They mention El Zante specifically.
Right.
And then completely different, you have these dramatic volcanic areas. They talked about exploring the El Boquerón crater. And then there's the contrast between the bigger cities like San Salvador, Santa Ana, and the slower rhythm of the smaller towns.
And it sounds like the motivation wasn't just tourism, not just ticking off sites. It went deeper than that.
Oh, absolutely. The source makes that really clear. It was less about adventure for adventure's sake and more about deliberately connecting with a new culture on a really profound level.
Challenging himself.
Yes. Challenging personal boundaries, finding a renewed sense of purpose, maybe. And a big factor, it seems, drawing them to El Salvador specifically was this strong perception of warmth and hospitality among Salvadorans.
Oh, okay.
They really wanted to experience that firsthand to, actually try and integrate.
But of course, you don't just drop into a new country, especially aiming to live like a local without hitting, well, some snags. What were those first hurdles they talked about?
Yeah, definitely some bumps. One of the biggest right off the bat was the language barrier. Spanish wasn't their first language, and they arrived with, well, pretty basic knowledge.
That sounds tough.
They describe the frustration, trying to navigate just everyday things, ordering food, asking for directions, even just like having a simple chat with a neighbor. It felt incredibly difficult at first.
There's that great story in the source, really relatable, about ordering pupusas.
Yes. Okay, so they're at a market in San Salvador trying to order pupusas, which are, the thick corn or rice flour tortillas stuffed with cheese or beans or pork.
The national dish. Everyone knows pupusas.
The absolute staple, yeah. But they kept mispronouncing it, saying pupusas, apparently.
Oops.
But the vendors, instead of getting frustrated, just gave them these sort of amused smiles. The source mentioned that was actually a really kind moment, helped ease the embarrassment.
That's nice.
And it wasn't long before they decided to really tackle it, Found a local language class committed to practicing every day.
Makes sense. And beyond just the words, adapting to a whole different way of life must have been quite the adjustment, too.
Definitely. The source talks about getting used to local customs, particularly the emphasis on personal connection in greetings.
How so?
Like warm handshakes or even hugs are pretty common, even with people you've just met, which, might feel unfamiliar at first if you're not used to it.
Yeah, a bit different.
But it quickly became something they really grew to appreciate, even favor. That sort of immediate human connection.
And then there were the practicalities, just the adventure of getting around, managing daily tasks.
Oh, the daily logistics. That sounds like a whole adventure in itself. Especially figuring out the transportation system. They talk a lot about the chicken buses.
Right, the famous repurposed U.S. school buses, all painted bright colors.
Exactly those. Packed with people, often blasting music. And apparently every single ride was a bit of a puzzle.
I can imagine.
Trying to figure out the routes, where exactly to get off, how much the fare was. They said each successful bus ride felt like this small but significant victory.
Yeah.
It really highlights how daily life abroad just requires this constant creative problem solving sometimes.
Okay, so they arrive, they're facing these initial hurdles with language and transport.
Yeah.
But how do they actually start meeting people? building connections when they knew absolutely nobody.
Yeah, that's another big one described in the source, starting totally from scratch socially. But it shows they were really proactive about it, made a real effort.
Wow.
Well, they started joining local meetups, going to community events, trying to put themselves out there.
Like that salsa dancing night mentioned
Yeah.
in Santa Tecla.
Yes, that's a specific example they gave. Just throwing themselves into those kinds of local activities, that was key.
And did it work?
It sounds like it did. Through those efforts, they discovered this genuinely welcoming spirit. People were open. And it wasn't actually that long before they started forming a pretty tight-knit group of friends.
That must have made a huge difference.
Oh, definitely. Those friends became like invaluable local guides, sharing insights, helping them navigate the culture. Building that community was clearly pivotal to the whole experience feeling successful.
Okay, so they've navigated some early challenges, started making friends. What did a typical day actually look like once they settled in a bit more?
The routine they describe, it sounds pretty idyllic, actually. Mornings started early, like 6 a.m.
Wow, early.
Yeah, often with coffee, just sitting on a balcony overlooking the Pacific. Especially when they were based in La Libertad. Can you just picture that? Starting your day with that view?
Incredible. And breakfast, I'm guessing, involved pupusas?
You guessed it, absolutely. Bought from a nearby Commodore, like a small, local, really informal eatery, cost maybe $1 or so.
Amazing.
Simple pupusas, served with curtido, that tangy cabbage slaw. It's a staple. The source really emphasizes how important that simple meal became, like a grounding part of the routine.
And the days themselves.
Yeah.
Flexible. They mentioned the digital nomad scene there is growing.
Yeah, that allowed for some remote work, it seems, but it also left plenty of time for exploration. So days might involve a visit to a market, like the Mercado Central in San Salvador, which sounds super bustling.
What would they buy?
Fresh fruits, mainly. They mentioned mangoes, avocados, and jocotes. Those are small, kind of tangy local fruits.
Okay. And afternoons weren't just spent working, I take it.
Not at all. The activities mentioned sound great. Anything from hiking in El Imposible National Park, think lush forests, waterfalls, to exploring the Ruta de las Flores, which is famous for its charming, colorful little villages.
Sounds lovely. And evenings, how do they wind down?
Evenings often involve socializing. Sharing tamales with neighbors gets a mention, which is a lovely sign of integration, right?
Definitely.
Or maybe catching live music at a beachside bar like down in El Tunco, the surf town.
Nice vibe.
Yeah. And the source really stresses how this slower, more deliberate pace of life focused on these simple routines and connections. It made them really appreciate the country's vibrant spirit. And it taught them to notice the small moments.
Like what?
Like kids playing soccer in the street, the smell of street food cooking, things you might miss in a faster-paced life. It was apparently a really stark and welcome contrast.
This really sounds like it went way beyond just sightseeing. It was a proper deep dive into the culture and, crucially, the food scene.
It certainly was. El Salvador's culture is described as this fascinating mix. Indigenous roots, colonial history, and, modern life all blended together. They mentioned visiting historical sites that offer glimpses into that past.
Like Joya de Seren, the UNESCO site. People call it the Pompeii of the Americas.
Exactly that one. It's incredible, a Mayan village, perfectly preserved under volcanic ash, gives you this direct window into how people lived, daily life way back before Columbus.
Amazing.
They also describe experiencing local festivals, community gatherings, mentioned the big San Miguel Carnival, and also a smaller local fiesta in a town called Suchitoto.
What was that like?
Complete with folkloric dances and marimba music, that traditional sort of resonant xylophone sound. They said those were real highlights, unforgettable experiences.
And the food. We have to circle back to the food.
That's like,
especially the pupusas.
oh, absolutely central. Pupusas aren't just food. They're like a cultural institution there. As we said, corn or rice flour dough, stuffed with cheese, beans, pork, whatever. And always, always served with curtino and a mild tomato salsa.
Did they try making them?
They did. The source mentions taking a cooking class to learn, admitted it's much harder than the local experts make it look.
I bet. What other dishes stood out as favorites?
They specifically highlight sopa de pata, which is a really hearty soup made with cow's foot. Sounds intense, but apparently delicious.
Okay, adventurous.
And also yuca frita, which are basically crispy cassava fries, often served with a spicy sauce. Those became another favorite.
Those sound good. And it seems like where you ate was almost as important as what you ate.
That's a key point the source makes, yeah. Those simple street food stalls, The pupuserias and the communal tables you often find there, they weren't just places to grab a bite.
They were more than that.
They were places that fostered a sense of belonging. Sharing a meal there became this genuinely cultural experience, deepening their connection to the community. It wasn't just about sustenance.
The source talks about one specific incident, calls it a defining moment from their trip. What happened there?
Right. This happened when they were trying to surf
Yeah.
at Playa El Zonte. They took a a classic wipeout.
Happens to the best of us.
Exactly. So feeling a bit bruised, maybe a little embarrassed or vulnerable, they were paddling back to shore. And then something unexpected happened. A young local boy on the beach saw them struggling back, and he just started cheering.
Oh, wow.
And then the source describes the whole crowd of locals nearby. They just joined in, clapping, cheering them on as they finally made it back to the beach. Just this small, simple, spontaneous gesture.
That must have felt incredible.
Yeah.
Especially in that moment.
It clearly had a huge impact. The source says that moment, despite coming right after a fall when they felt vulnerable, it just completely crystallized all the warmth and community spirit they'd been sensing.
Made them feel truly welcomed.
Exactly. Made them feel genuinely at home, even in that slightly embarrassing situation.
And that experience, that story, it seems to connect directly to this theme of resilience that runs through the whole narrative.
It really does. The source uses that anecdote to frame the idea of wipeouts. Whether it's literally in surfing or metaphorically navigating the challenges of daily life in El Salvador.
As lessons.
As powerful lessons in persistence, yeah. It was like this reminder to just get back up, dust yourself off, find the joy in the process, in the journey itself, and that maybe vulnerability isn't always a weakness, especially if you're in a supportive community.
So reflecting on the entire month, beyond just the individual stories, what are the big, maybe transformative lessons that the source distills from this whole experience?
This is where it gets really interesting, I think. What can you, listening, take away from this journey? Well, first, there's patience. Definitely patience. Navigating a new language, a new culture, it absolutely demands it. And learning to celebrate those small communication wins really pays off.
Right. And flexibility, too. Learning to adapt when things inevitably don't go according to plan. Embracing the spontaneous nature of local life.
Absolutely crucial. Then there's also a profound lesson in mindfulness and presence. That slower pace of life they described, really appreciating those small details, kids playing, the smell of food, simple routines. It cultivates this deeper connection to the present moment.
And maybe the most powerful lesson that comes across is the value of community spirit.
Yes, definitely. The source emphasizes how the genuine warmth and openness of the Salvadorans they met often extended despite people facing their own challenges. It really inspired them to prioritize relationships and human connection over, say, material concerns.
Reshape their perspective.
Completely reshaped their perspective on what truly matters in life. And finally, there's resilience, just developed naturally through that constant need for creative problem solving.
Whether it was figuring out the buses or...
Exactly, or dealing with unexpected things like power outages. It builds this inner strength.
It's a pertinent reminder, isn't it, that challenges aren't just roadblocks, they're actually opportunities to learn and adapt and grow.
Couldn't have said it better.
So for anyone listening who's maybe feeling inspired by this, thinking about living abroad, or just immersing themselves more deeply in another culture,
Right.
the source offers some really practical guidance based on this experience.
They do. The main takeaway, the overarching advice, is really to approach it with an open heart. And importantly, a willingness to embrace the unknown, the uncertainty.
And practically.
Practically, start by learning at least basic language skills. Even just a little bit goes a long way in showing respect, opening doors. Do your research on local customs beforehand, too.
Yeah.
Helps you navigate those cultural nuances.
And be proactive socially.
Yeah, actively seek out community events, meetups, ways to connect with people. Don't just wait for it to happen. And maybe most importantly, be patient with yourself.
How so?
You will make mistakes. It's just part of the learning process, and that's totally okay. Don't beat yourself up about it.
Good advice. Any budgeting tips mentioned?
Yes, some practical advice there too. Budget wisely. While daily costs like meals can be super affordable, they mentioned $2 to $5, sometimes you have to remember to factor in unexpected costs. Things like transportation, maybe needing medical care, stuff like that.
So prepare, but also just be ready to jump in and roll with it.
That sums it up perfectly. The source is clear, the challenges are real, they don't sugarcoat it, but they emphasize absolutely that the rewards, they're worth every single hurdle.
The new perspectives, the friendships.
The genuine friendships, the indelible memories you create.
Yeah.
Absolutely worth it, according to this account.
Well, this deep dive into one person's month, really trying to live like a local in El Salvador, it offers such a rich picture, doesn't it? A tapestry of challenges met, connections made. It's a vivid snapshot of what real immersion can feel like.
It truly is. And, it leaves you, the listener, with some pretty fundamental questions to mull over, I think. What does an experience like this, shedding the familiar, embracing the truly unknown, what does that tell you about the very nature of home? Or about the unexpected depth of human connection you can find really anywhere? Or maybe just what rewards might be waiting for you, personally, if you took a brave step outside your own comfort zone sometime.
Lots to reflect on there.
Definitely gives you something to think about.